Welcome to our latest edition of our 25 for 25 podcast. This one is especially special to me. Just given my own background, growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, watching West Indies cricket, Michael Holding, you were an integral part of that team, which defied and shaped so much of the cricketing landscape and sporting landscape many years ago.
This is 25 for 25, a Show Racism the Red Card podcast. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Particularly with the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement, you again rose to international prominence. Give me your opinion, ad-lib, on-the-spot opinion around where we were at the time in 2020, which resulted in your book, Why We Kneel, How We Rise. Michael, it's an honor to have you on with me here today. Thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure, Shaka, and I'm glad to be able to join you. And thanks for the invitation.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Michael, there's so much we could talk about, but I wouldn't take up all that time. I just to satisfy some of my own childhood ego. Listen, but I want to start. Let's go back to some of your own cricketing experiences and how it shaped who you became. Not necessarily as a cricketer, but as a Black man trying to navigate your way in what is largely a white world.
Yeah, but as I've said on so many occasions, Shaka, I was very, very fortunate in how I was brought up and where I was born, where I lived, where I played my sport mainly. Because as you know, everyone would know I was born in Jamaica. I played most of my sport for the Caribbean. I spent most of my time in the Caribbean. Obviously, I would have toured with the West Indies team. I went to Australia. I went to England. And of course, I came across what you would call uncomfortable moments with some comments that were made. But each time that happened, Shaka, I simply brushed it off. It hurt. Anything that you hear that is uncomplimentary, especially when it comes to race and creed and what, your background, it's always going to be hurtful. But because of the fact that I knew I was going back to Jamaica and I wouldn't come across it as a young man growing up in Jamaica, I brushed it off and I would say to myself, these people have a problem, I don't. So don't worry about it, you'll see me back home. But it also helped me a great deal to understand the world because I pretty much grew up in a cocoon in Jamaica. Before I was a young man growing up in Jamaica, there was racism there. There was discrimination. There still is discrimination, but on a different headings, of course, now. But with the racism in Jamaica, that was more 40s, 50s, and 60s. By the time I became a young man, getting into the society and experiencing what the society was, it was harder there. Can't tell you it wasn't there totally, but it was harder there. So I didn't really come across it. So I was very comfortable in Jamaica, growing up in that cocoon. But then when I started the tour, I got to learn more about the entire world and exactly what this thing was all about. But, I didn't worry about it. When I talk to people, Shaka, for instance, that grew up in England, West Indians and people of West Indian background, who grew up in England, and I hear about their experiences, I count my blessings. Then I talk to Ebony Rainford Brent about what she went through as the first Black woman to play cricket for England. I have to count my blessings because I certainly would not have been able to put up with that and to make the strides that she has made. So I have to be very grateful for my upbringing and where I was born and where I played my sport. But traveling is an education in many respects. And I'm very happy that I was able to do that with the West Indies team and grow as a human being because of that experience.
Ebony is such an incredible young lady. I mean, I know the relationship that two of you have. I have seen the documentary pieces that two of you have done together, and it works so wonderfully well in telling that whole story about racism and who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. But you talk about, as I hear you speak, it makes me think of cricket back in the day and some of the challenges that West Indies cricket has now in terms of the team, in terms of performances. And a lot is said about teams of the 80s, in the 70s and 80s that dominated as they did. This realization that they were representing Black sport in a way that I don't think Black athletes do today, given the nature of colonialism and many of the Caribbean countries, Sydney at the time, just coming out of colonialism and the overarching racism of the time, that was motivation, all the motivation that the West Indies cricket needed at the time. Is that how you felt? Because oftentimes as an athlete, in the moment, you don't recognize power that you're bringing. You don't recognize the hopes of the fans that maybe you're carrying. Is that something that not just you, but the team were aware of?
Initially, Shaka, I wasn't aware of the importance and the significance and the weight of the West Indies team was carrying in regards to Afro-Caribbeans and, of course, Black people all over the world who identified with us. Because when I went to South Africa, the first time I went to South Africa after apartheid, I got to understand that the Black guys down there, the Black folks down there supported the West Indies team. Although they couldn't see us, all they wanted to do was hear about the West Indies team and our winning. But initially, it didn't echo with me at all. I had no idea. I was just playing cricket. I was playing for the West Indies and I wanted to win for the West Indies. The guys who played county cricket, I think it had a greater impact on them. I think it came to realization earlier to them exactly what and who they were representing. Because having played county cricket and spent summers in England, they knew exactly what was taking place. My first time to England was 1976 with the West Indies team. I had absolutely no idea. And even at the end of that tour, I had some glimpses and some inkling as to what the situation was, but it didn't hit home to me until I started to go back later on in life. I was there throughout the 80s, back with the West Indies team in 80, World Cup 83, West Indies team 84, Derbyshire 85 up to 89. So that is when I really understood what it was all about and what it meant to the Caribbean people living in the UK for the West Indies to do well. It was always going to be important for us as a team to win because we know we represent the folks back home, irrespective of colonialism and race problems. We're just representing the folks back home and they want us to win. So that was always going to be important. But the folks away from home, and especially those living in a society where they felt as if they didn't belong and they felt as if they were less than the rest, it impacted even greater.
As I hear you speak, oftentimes when I go back to the Caribbean, when I go back to Trinidad and Tobago, people comment on some of the successes, some of my own achievements being despite where I'm from. And the more conversations like this that I have, I realize that those successes are because of where I'm from, because of the grounding I have growing up in the West Indies, even in a post-colonial society, and that's exactly what I'm hearing from you and recognize of that team back in the 70s and 80s. And then you go on, your career comes in, and I'm going to just flash quickly past it. You become a highly respected cricket commentator, and then that fateful day in 2020, rain delay. And you were asked your opinions on the Black Lives Matter movement, a moment that had the whole world sit up and take notice. You had no notes, something that you were prepared to speak on, and I think people recognized the authenticity of what you were seeing, of your own experiences, of someone who's navigated this world as well as anyone has, yet still have felt the impacts of racism as a young man through the entirety of your career, both as a player and as a commentator. while I don't want to I don't want to dwell on that moment. You've spoken of that moment so well, but it resulted in a book, How We Rise, that I think was timely, was powerful in a way that the moment needed. As much as we were here talking about racism, the Black Lives Matter movement, where we were, and trying to figure out where we go, it was important that the history of racism be told. Why did you feel it was? Why did you feel that that was where you wanted your starting point of your book to be? Why did you think that that was the message that you wanted to share with the world?
Shaka, you say you don't want to go back to that moment, 2020, but I just give me a little bit of leeway here to tell you how you look to this came about. Because this was a perfect storm coming together. As you know, and everyone knows, 2020 was COVID. And at that point, there was no vaccine, nothing like that. And there wasn't even, we weren't even sure there would be cricket in England in 2020, the summer of 2020. My boss at Sky called me during the summer that hadn't quite started yet, when I was still back home here. And he said to me, we just hired Ebony Rainford Brent, and we had a Zoom meeting, about 20 of us in the cricket department, and talking about the BLM and talking about Ebony's experiences, because this is now the first Black woman to be employed by Sky in the cricket department. Well, in the broadcast department anyway. They have other women working in there. And she broke down talking about it in the Zoom meeting. And Brian Henderson said, no, this is affecting her this much. This must be a very serious situation. So he called me and said, listen, if there's cricket and you do come to England, we're going to record something with Ebony that we want to play out during a day's play about BLM and about her experiences. Would you be willing to join in? And I said, absolutely. I've been waiting for this opportunity to talk about this, because people don't understand how tiresome and how weary this thing is for a person of color to be going around the world and be worrying every day about how they are perceived, how they are looked upon, how they will just get through each day.
But if I may interject here, Michael.
Yeah.
Speaking about race and racism is not something that people volunteer to do. As much as an impact it has on our lives, we've kind of learned to shy away from some of those conversations. But you were stepping into that perfect storm, as you call it. That strikes me as a little bit odd. It's not, as I say, it's not something we normally do.
I was given the opportunity, Shaka. As you said, people of color, Black people, don't usually do that. You know why? Because every time a Black person talks about racism and talks about the inequality of life and what they go through, people who do not want to hear always say, oh, there goes another angry Black man, or there goes another angry Black woman, or they have a chip on their shoulder. So you don't bother, because that is the reaction you're going to get 9 times out of 10. So you grin and bear it. And I spoke about that in my book, about going through life sometimes just grinning and bearing it. And I was given this opportunity by Brian Henderson, the boss at Sky Cricket, and I was not going to miss this opportunity. Obviously, you're doing commentary. You work with ESPN. You're not going to go on a set on ESPN and talk about racism unless you're asked. If you're asked, you get involved in it. Same thing with me. I'm not going to bring it up in a cricket commentary. That is not what I am employed to do. But I was asked, and so I dove in. But talking about what Black people don't do, after that talk on Sky, one of your compatriots called me, Thierry Henry. And one of the things he said to me, when I saw you come to tears, I had to find a number to call you. And he said to me also, you know, Black people are not supposed to cry. He said, that is what I grew up believing. And seeing you shedding tears on television shattered that for me. And I said, it's okay. So a lot of things that people look at and say, this is not supposed to happen. And we as Black people and people of color think, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. No. We have emotions just like anyone else, and we have been through a lot. And if we want to get emotional about things and we want to talk about things and show people that, yes, we want to talk about this subject, we should not be afraid to talk about it. Yes, people have been victimized. People have been victimized for saying things, for demonstrating about certain things. But if we continue to push the pedal, Shaka, at some point the vehicle will move. And that is what we have got to do. Do not allow people to intimidate us into keep on being quiet, because that's what they want. They want us to continue to be quiet. And that is how this book came about as well, because after what I said on Sky, I got so much feedback, so much positive feedback as well. And not just from my own people, Black people and people of color. I got feedback from people all over the world, people who did not even know me, who got in touch with the ECB, for instance, because they knew the ECB would know how to find me, or got in touch with Sky for them to forward something to me. And some people that I had on my contact list, some South African guy who is Afrikaans, who people always look upon, just see labels are always around. And they say Africans are so racist. This gentleman was one of the first gentlemen that messaged me and said, I heard you, I'm glad you said it because it needed to be said. So with all that coming in, I decided eventually, a bit of prodding came along, of course. Ed Hawkins, who was my ghostwriter, plus Ian Ward, who was the person who spoke to me on Sky. All of them said, let us keep going. You have to keep going. And so that's how the book came about. That perfect storm all coming together. Because I didn't even have to be in England that summer. Because even when the cricket started, Hendo called me and said, Mikey, you are 6 or 7 years old. You are in one of these vulnerable groups. There's no vaccine. If you do not want to come to England, you don't have to. You'll still be paid. And I said, no, if there's cricket, I'm coming. So all these factors came together to produce everything and then the book.
I often speak about reluctant role models. It's a phrase that my wife absolutely hates. So being the man that I am, I use it every opportunity I get. And it, what you're saying kind of speaks to that, in that you find yourself in this position as a role model, being able to speak about issues that are dear to you without really or inserting yourself in that space. You are here, you are asked an opinion, and you deliver it as earnestly and as honestly as you can. And then I think I'm right in saying your intention is, I've said what I have to say, I'm going to step back and resume my life as it has been. But yet you find yourself being called to again step into that light. Is that something you give thought or further thought to, how that moment changed not just your life, but more to the point, the way that so many others who endure racism, who are asked to speak up on racism, recognize their own responsibilities?
As you rightly said, Shaka, when I finished that, what I said on Sky, I was happy to sit back and just get back to what I was doing and continue my life as normal. I was even asked about it during a commentary stint. And I used some cricket analogy. And I said then, I have bowled the ball. I have found the edge. It's now up to the slip cord and we were down there to take the catch. I have done my part. But again, because there was so much, as I said, positive feedback and so much prompting and prodding from so many different people and so many different directions, I had to take it forward. And to be honest, I am extremely happy that I did. Because not just from what I said on Sky, but from what I've done with this book, or from what this book has done, it has prompted so many other people to come out and to speak their mind, to not be afraid to say whatever they have got to say about the subject of racism. And I'm not talking about just Black people and people of color. A lot of white people have also come out and said it. I have been asked to speak to so many different corporations and organizations about racism and diversity and equality and all that. So I know that is all because of what took place on Sky and because of the book. And people will say, oh, some of those companies, they're just doing it as a facade. I don't believe that, because they didn't have to ask.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe that things are changing in a positive direction. It will take a long time, as we all know, Shaka. This world been going on for so many centuries with it as it is. But I think there's movement in the right direction.
And you make that point in the pages of your book, how long this has been a part of who we are, of humanity today.
Yep.
How it's been shaped and recrafted to tell a certain narrative, to offer comfort to one race. And while we here at Show Racism the Red Card proudly boast as being the UK's largest anti-racism educational charity, we find ourselves forward-looking in terms of anti-racism and shaping that world to come. But you take a different view, and I find that powerful and delivered in a way that I had not been seen in recognizing the history of it, not just through your own experiences, but through many generations before us. Why did you feel it was important to detail that history? And I know that this is part of your own education and your own understanding, but so often we have these conversations about going forward. How do we move forward? I hadn't heard it told in the way as powerfully as you've told that history.
Well, as I've said to people, so many people have said, oh, this has been going on so long and nothing is changing. I said, no, you cannot say that. You have got to be able to look at where it's coming from. Strides have been made in the right direction, but we have a very, very long way to go. And you may think, oh, nothing is happening. But look at the history. And that is why I went back into the history of this racism thing, to see how it was crafted, how it was engineered, and why it was done, Shaka. It was done primarily for economic reasons. So that one set of people could subjugate another and use them to build themselves and to build their country. That is what it was all about. And when I tell people that there's progress, young people are not seeing it because they are born into something that they don't know the history of. And the history has some bad moments, but it also has good moments, and the good moments have not been taught. And that is why we need to reveal those good moments. All races, and this word race, I want people to recognize the fact that the word race came into the history, into the lexicon of our language only about 500 years ago. Man has been on earth for 300,000 years. And it's only 500 years ago, race came in, because that's how they wanted to differentiate so that they could subjugate oneself. And what we need to recognize is all the races, as we call them, have had their successes and their failures. Just that the documentation of the successes of Black people and people of color has not been done because they don't want to highlight it. And I give the example of, again, South Africa has taught me so much. Going to South Africa, I talked to everybody down there. That's how I could meet an African gentleman, a white Englishman who was, well, he's South African, but from English background. The Black South Africans, Black South Africans, everybody. And one of the things that some of the Black South Africans, or the South Africans of color, told me was that they were prevented from watching the West Indies team play. They didn't get a lot of news about it because the government, the apartheid government, did not want them to recognize that Black people and people of color could excel. If you teach them, if you show them that people like them can excel, then they will also want to excel, which is what they did not want. They want to subjugate them. They want to keep them undercover, as you may say. And that is why our history, the history of Black people and people of color and our accomplishments have not been taught. There are so much, as you read in the book, Shaka, that has not been taught, that I reveal in that book. Who knows that it was a Black man who first set foot on the North Pole? Who knows that it was a Black man, a slave, who introduced inoculation to the Western world in Boston when smallpox was destroying the place? Who knows that it's a Black man who invented the three-way traffic light? Who knows? Well, after my talk at Sky, people don't know that it was a Black man who invented the carbon filament that makes a light shine. All those things are not taught. And there are many, many more accomplishments and achievements and discoveries that Black people have done that are highlighted in my book that are not taught, because it doesn't make sense for people who want to subjugate another set of people to teach them that they can be great.
So, Michael, let me ask, what's next? You bowled the ball, good length, you found the edge. I'm standing in slip. What is my responsibility now as a Black man, as a father to Black children? What is society's responsibility in moving these lessons forward, in continuing to fight against racism?
Well, I'm glad you said society, Shaka. You know, we as Black people and people of color have responsibilities, yes, and we have to have a way to try and deal with them. But the society, I think, is what has to fight this problem. The entire society, everyone. And there is movement. There is definitely support from people other than Black people and people of color. As I've said to so many people, if you look at the demonstrations and the marches during Martin Luther King's time in the US, more than 95% of the people were Black. If you look at what happened with the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement during COVID in 2020, a lot of the people were white, a lot of people were non-Blacks and non-people of color. There were even demonstrations, Shaka, in your sport, in a women's team in Sweden. A all-white women's team in Sweden took the knee before a football game. They got a lot of criticism from certain quarters, but they didn't care. They did it. And that is what is important, that people from all walks of life, all different societies around the world, all different races around the world have recognized finally that things are not right. There's too much inequality and we all have to fight it. We can't fight it on our own as Black people and people of color. The entire society has to fight it. And thankfully, we are getting support from people that are not like us. As Thierry Henry said, a lot of people, they love our culture. They love to visit where we are from. They love our food, but they don't love the person. But now I'm finding that they are getting to recognize that we are people, that there is a person here under this dark skin. And people are recognizing that they can help us, that they can fight with us, because we ain't going to be able to do it on our own. And we as Black people, we as people of color have got to recognize that we cannot blame everyone around us that shows certain attitudes towards us, because that is what they were taught. We have got to educate them to show them that what they were taught was not right. And those who want to see, someone want to see it at all, Shaka, some of them will not be interested. But those who want to see will see and say, yes, this needs to change. And there are a lot of good people out there. Far more good people than bad people.
Absolutely.
What we need to recognize is that we need to wake these good people up. We have got to show them that they cannot continue to be silent. They cannot continue to see injustice and just say to themselves, well, I am not like that. They must get involved and show other people that that is not the way forward. So everyone can recognize, I use the word everyone, obviously it wasn't going to be everyone, but as many people as possible can recognize the way forward and how we can all help each other to move forward to have this world a better place.
Absolutely. Michael, I'm mindful of your time, but it would be remiss of me not to ask, as someone living in the Caribbean, as someone who's recognized so many, our fullest history, what do you make of the protests around the Commonwealth that we witnessed with Prince William and Princess Kate?
Well, to be honest, I'm not too sure that I am in agreement with trying to embarrass Prince William and Princess Kate and whoever it is from the royal family that visits various islands. I don't believe in that at all. What I believe in is to sitting down with them privately and discussing the entire situation and show them where we stand. To try to embarrass anyone publicly, I don't believe in that. They need education as well, Shaka. Their education has not been as wide as it should be for them to know and learn everything. Because I even saw a headline in a newspaper recently, not too long ago, about the war in Ukraine, where Prince William apparently, I didn't hear him with my own ears, but it's in the newspapers, apparently said, oh, Europe is not accustomed to war.
Mm-hmm.
Europe isn't accustomed to war. Where have the biggest wars have been? And he forgot about Bosnia not too long ago. Anyway, as I said, they all need to be educated. And until we can educate everyone, for all of us to recognize the true history, we ain't going anywhere. And we need to make steps. And I use that word we again, meaning everyone, not just Black people and people of color. We all need to educate ourselves and move in the right direction.
Mike, I'll close by just saying thank you. And I feel like on a personal level, I have so much to thank you for the role you played in my earliest life and shaping my own identity and recognizing the power of sports and how it continues to impact people like us. But more lately, the way you speak up about our own experiences, about the trials and tribulations that people of color continue to endure. And you've shaped how we continue to have those conversations, continue to move these issues around equality forward. Thank you so much for everything that you have been and continue to be.
Thank you very much for having me again, Shaka. And let's hope we can continue to make strides in the right direction.
Certainly will. Certainly will.